Ernie, I'm confident. You should be making me like, I'm not making it play. Oh, it's hot.
There is a moment, somewhere in the winter of 2000, that almost nobody talks about anymore. Shaquille O'Neal was standing at the center of the world, the most dominant player in the NBA. A man so physically overwhelming that arenas seemed to shrink when he walked in. Sponsors lined up. Cameras followed. Children wore his jersey like a prayer. But behind the smile that filled billboards from Los Angeles to London, something nobody saw was quietly hollowing him out. He was a giant who still felt, in the most private corridors of himself, like the boy whose father never chose to stay. And the world, currently searching desperately for the real Shaq story behind the Shaq 30 for 30 documentary, is only now beginning to understand why. There is an irony in Shaquille O'Neal's story that hurts too much to be coincidence. The child who grew so enormous, so fast, so visibly, that he became impossible to ignore, even when all he wanted was to disappear. The teenager who discovered that sheer physical power could do what no amount of words ever managed. It could make the world respect him, fear him, include him. The icon who built an entire empire, from championship rings to sound tech by Shaq, from Shaq gummies to business ventures spanning continents, entirely on being the biggest, loudest, most impossible presence in every room. All of that, so that life would arrive quietly and begin asking the one question his size could never answer. Who are you when the crowd finally goes home? Shaquille Rashawn O'Neal was born on March 6, 1972, in Newark, New Jersey. Newark in those years was not a city that whispered gently to its children about futures. It was a city of concrete fatigue, of corner stores with iron gates, of streets that smelled of exhaust and ambition slowly going cold. His mother, Lucille O'Neal, was 92 years old when she gave birth to him, young, fierce, and operating entirely without a map. His biological father, Joe Tony, was not there, not in any sustained or meaningful way. He would not be a presence in Shaquille's life, only an absence, one that Shaquille would carry like a stone in his chest for decades to come. There was no privilege here, no paved path, no grandfather who knew the right people, no family name that opened doors. There was a teenage mother who loved her son with everything she had, and there was a child growing at a rate that the world found alarming. By the time Shaquille was a young boy, he was already towering over every peer in ways that attracted the wrong kind of attention. Children are not always kind to what they cannot understand. He was mocked for his size, reduced to a body rather than a person, and the loneliness of that experience planted itself early and impossibly deep. His mother eventually married Philip Arthur Harrison, the man now trending across America as people search specifically for Shaq's stepfather, Philip Arthur Harrison, trying to understand this complicated, iron-willed figure who shaped everything. Philip was a U.S. Army sergeant whose discipline was absolute and whose expectations were immovable. He was not cruel, but he was steel. He ran the household like a military operation, with structure, consequence, and a love that expressed itself through demands rather than tenderness. The family moved constantly, the relentless rhythm of military life pulling them through Germany, Georgia, Texas, and back again. Every move meant a new school, new faces, new versions of being the enormous kid nobody knew yet. Shaquille would later say, with a steadiness in his voice that sounded carefully practiced, "I never felt like I fit in anywhere." You move that much, you stop trying to put down roots. But the wound was older and deeper than social displacement. The biological father who never returned left a question mark inside Shaquille that no trophy, no championship, no empire could ever fully answer. In interview after interview, across 3 decades of public life, he returned to it with the quiet persistence of someone still trying to resolve something unresolvable. "I didn't have my biological father around," he admitted once, his voice dropping below its usual thunder. "That affected me. It still affects me. He was a boy who grew into a monument of physical power while quietly aching for the most ordinary thing imaginable. At 14, already 6 feet 6 inches tall and still accelerating upward, the size that once made him a target was beginning to transform. A coach named Dale Brown spotted him at an army base in Germany and saw something that went far beyond dimension. He saw hunger. He saw a boy who needed a stage large enough to finally contain him, and he became one of the first men in Shaquille's life to say, without hesitation, "You belong somewhere extraordinary." That encounter with Dale Brown did not immediately change everything. But it cracked open a door that had, until that moment, been sealed shut. Basketball became the language Shaquille had been searching for his entire displaced, uprooted life. When he stepped onto a court, something extraordinary happened. The boy who never fit, never belonged, never stayed long enough in any city to matter, suddenly made perfect sense. The size that had made him feel monstrous became architecture. The power that had made him a target became a weapon. On that court, Shaquille O'Neal was not too much. For the first time in his life, he was exactly enough. It was not talent yet, not purely. It was recognition. The silent, absolute certainty of having found the place where all his contradictions resolved into something beautiful. He played through high school at Cole High School in San Antonio, Texas, drawing attention that traveled far beyond state lines. By the time he arrived at Louisiana State University under Dale Brown in 1989, the basketball world was already holding its breath. He averaged over 13 rebounds per game as a freshman. The numbers were not statistics. They were a boy finally speaking in the only language that had never rejected him. The NBA draft of 1992 made it official. The Orlando Magic selected Shaquille O'Neal with the first overall pick. He was 20 years old. He arrived in professional basketball not as a prospect, but as a phenomenon, immediately. In his rookie season, he averaged 23.4 points and 13.9 rebounds per game, numbers that made veterans go quiet in locker rooms. He was named NBA Rookie of the Year. He made the All-Star team. He was, by every measurable standard, exactly what everyone had predicted. But fame arrived so fast, so total, so consuming, that nobody stopped to ask what it was doing to the young man underneath the phenomenon. The Orlando years gave way to Los Angeles. In 1996, Shaquille signed with the Lakers, a move that felt less like a career decision and more like a cultural event. And then came Kobe Bryant. And then came Phil Jackson. And then came the dynasty. 3 consecutive NBA championships, 2000, 2001, 2002. In 2000, Shaquille was named NBA Finals MVP, NBA MVP, and All-Star MVP simultaneously, a convergence so rare it had never happened before in the same season. He was the most dominant force the league had seen since Wilt Chamberlain, and the world, every corner of it, knew his name. But behind the red carpets and championship parades, something was beginning to crack. The relationship with Kobe Bryant, brilliant and combustible, deteriorated from partnership into something closer to open warfare. The Lakers' locker room, once a cathedral of shared purpose, became a place of competing silences and accumulated grievances. In 2004, after the Lakers lost the NBA Finals to the Detroit Pistons, Shaquille was traded to the Miami Heat in a move that shook the basketball world and confirmed what insiders had whispered for years: the dynasty was finished, consumed from within by 2 enormous personalities that could not coexist. He won one more championship in Miami in 2006, but the Los Angeles years, that perfect, impossible run, were gone forever. And then there was Charles Barkley. The Shaq and Charles Barkley fight saga, currently trending explosively as the Shaq 30 for 30 documentary resurfaces buried conversations, reveals something essential about who Shaquille O'Neal is beneath the performance. Their relationship on television, sharp, loud, genuinely funny, masked a tension that occasionally erupted into something raw and more honest. The Shaq-Chuck fight moments, debated and replayed endlessly online this week, were never really about basketball disagreements. They were two enormous personalities, both carrying wounds from childhoods that shaped them before the cameras ever found them, colliding in real time on national television. Shaq versus Rudy Gobert became another flashpoint. Shaq's public criticism of the Minnesota Timberwolves center during the Anthony Edwards era, sparking fresh debate about legacy, relevance, and who gets to define greatness. Today, at 52 years old, Shaquille O'Neal remains standing. Not as the invincible force of the championship years, but as something more interesting and more durable. The Shaq Hawks investment, his growing ownership stake in the Atlanta Hawks, signals a man actively constructing a third identity beyond player and entertainer. Sound Tech by Shaq Gummies, his doctorate in education from Barry University, all of it speaks to a man who refused to let the story end at retirement. His legacy is not the championships, though those are permanent. His legacy is the living proof that a boy abandoned by his father, displaced by a military life, mocked for the very body that would eventually make him immortal, can transform every wound into a foundation. From the Newark streets to the Hall of Fame, Shaquille O'Neal is proof that what breaks you early does not get to decide what you build later. What lesson do you take from Shaq's story? How many times have you kept building when the foundation beneath you was shaking? Share your thoughts below and subscribe for more stories of those who transformed their deepest wounds into their greatest power. Because in the end, as Shaquille himself proved with every step of that improbable journey, the bigger they are, the harder the road, and the more extraordinary the arrival.